Introduce our next guest to the stage. He is passionate about human rights and he heads up the innovation division of Swedish organisation Civil Rights Defenders. But he has a very strong, long-running background in social entrepreneurship. He's also worked for the United Nations, the Embassy of Sweden in Australia, and he heads up one of Sweden's biggest social entrepreneurship podcasts called Plurify. Please welcome Mathias Antonsson to the stage.
How is everyone?
Good.
Great. So I just figured we'll start with just figuring out who is here in the audience. There's some really powerful lights on me, but I think I can make up. So if you could please raise your arm if you are an entrepreneur. All right. So keep your arm up or raise it if you consider yourself to be a social entrepreneur. Well, a little wavering, but okay. All right. And who in here would say that they are familiar with or well known in the area of human rights? Okay, so I think this will make sense then, because that's what I'm going to talk about, tech and human rights. Last question, who in here is considering themselves to be from Sweden? All right, and outside of Europe? Okay, thank you. Will help me frame this a little bit. So, this is Minam. She's also known as Mother Mushroom. She won the 2015 Civil Rights Defender of the Year award. She is well known for her use of social media to speak out against injustices and human rights abuses in her native Vietnam. In early 2006, she started blogging when she went to go to a hospital and she saw that there were lots of people waiting outside in the blazing sun. And the reason why was because they could not afford to bribe the hospital officials to get the care that they very much needed. On the 29th of June this year, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for conducting propaganda. The stakes here are high. The price for freedom is steep. This is easy to forget as we gather here in Sweden, one of the safest spaces in the world. However, Sweden is part of a shrinking minority of open countries, and that is why human rights is as important today as it has always been. This slide is a few years old, so bear that in mind, please, but it comes from Guardian, who is obviously a solid source, so I figured I'll still use these numbers. About half of the world's states have implemented controls that affect tens of thousands of organizations across the globe. More than 60 countries have between 2012 and 2015 drafted laws that curtail the activities of NGOs or otherwise of civil society organizations. 96 countries have taken steps to inhibit international support to local organizations and have left them either harassed, closed down, or even expelled. And it might be worth noting in this context that the UN or United Nations system have 193 member states. So by comparison, these numbers are really, really high. And of course, this was a few years ago, and in the human rights space we talk about it was actually really, really good 3 or 4 years ago. So since then, with what's happening, as I'm sure you know, with quite a few examples around the world, things have not really improved. At the end of the day, it's about control. Throughout history, from ancient chieftains through feudalism, through the Cold War, it's always been about control. And billions of dollars are today being invested in surveillance alone. And that doesn't always go for the repressive regimes. Everyone is doing the same game. There are legitimate reasons, of course, such as national security and curtailing terrorism. But don't take their word for it. Without transparency, it becomes pure control. Worldwide, human rights defenders are facing this increased risks, and the space for civil society continues to shrink. Repressive regimes now openly question international human rights standards and legitimize the use of repressive measures unshamedly. Governments adopt repressive NGO laws and criminalize the legitimate and very important work of human rights defenders. There is also an ongoing trend in criminalizing the act of receiving foreign funding, meaning it makes it harder and harder to support these actors in their local environment. Women human rights defenders continue to face additional and gender-specific risks. Threats and attacks related to their role as a leading woman in their society. Taking active part in the public domain is much harder for them, particularly as they often question the traditional roles. Internal communication technologies underpin many of these human rights advances that we do see, while simultaneously being an avenue for the very attacks against them. It's a two-edged sword in that sense. Civil rights defenders, who we are, might be interesting to know as well. Why am I here? Civil Rights Defenders is an independent expert organization that was founded in 1982 here in Sweden. We operate with the mission to defend the principles of people's civil and political rights and empower human rights defenders at risk worldwide. Civil Rights Defenders has a presence on 4 continents and works in some of the world's most repressive regions. By working in collaboration with local partners and focusing on innovation, our goal is to achieve long-term sustainable change in the name of human rights. So we work with these local human rights defenders because they are the best at holding their governments to account, and they are also the most informed about the local situation. We often operate under the radar because imagine how hard it is to create change when there are billions of dollars being invested in surveillance alone. When your every move is recorded, whether that is online or offline. I'm going to tell you a little story about our founder, Gerard Nadler, who in 1982 wanted to establish a presence of our organization in the Soviet Union. He could not get a visa at the time because they wouldn't let a lot of Swedes in. However, there was a great demand for, don't ask me why, for some reason to get Finnish gardeners into the Soviet Union. So he disguised himself as a gardener and was allowed entry. And that's how we started working in the Soviet Union. Since then, of course, a lot have happened. The Cold War has ended. The world as we know it today has improved a lot before the latest shift where it's sort of a downturn again. But it's important to know that these leaders of the repressive regimes, they are really creative. We should not underestimate them. They use the gray areas for control, and they use a lot of the digital opportunities that are presented to them today. Not seldom either also using firms and tech companies that operate out of Europe. So as such, we didn't necessarily choose to work with innovation. In order to serve our human rights defenders, we have to. So I mentioned that we work on 4 continents and we operate in about 30 countries globally. And to achieve change, we focus on 4 main pillars. Monitoring the state authorities and demanding accountability, justice, and reparations when people's human rights have been violated. For example, here in Sweden, we defended and won in the case of the Roma registry performed by the Swedish police. If you're outside of Sweden, which I know that quite a few of you are, you might not have heard about this case, but it really was a big case, an important case here. It was actually the largest damages adjudication in Swedish history. So we're obviously very proud of having been able to prove that wrongdoing and uphold the rights of the Swedish Roma. We inform the public so that you have a chance to have the knowledge and tools to claim your fundamental rights and freedoms. We also conduct lobbying and advocacy, particularly towards decision makers. And we empower, which I talked about earlier, we particularly focus on empowering the human rights defenders and organizations to provide, and we do this by providing expertise, training, and when we can, funding as well. Here's a video. Should be playing automatically. It's always tricky to have videos and presentations.
Maybe you can dance it.
I can dance it, there we are. I've been told by my girlfriend that I'm a good dancer, but I'm not sure if I'm that good. Particularly not without any music, it's just a black screen. I'm wondering how it's working with the technician, or if we should just move ahead. You give me a signal?
There we go.
Behind you.
It's just the audio bit.
She was later found murdered, shot in the head. That same year, the violence continued, leading to the deaths of several more human rights defenders in the North Caucasus alone. When faced with the devastating news of Natalia's death and those of her colleagues, civil rights defenders asked themselves one question: what can we do to protect human rights defenders at risk? At the core of the problem was that assaults were taking place without anyone knowing about them, making it impossible to protect or help the victims. There was a need to enable victims to send out a distress signal when attacked. In the spring of 2013, the Natalia Project, the first assault alarm system for human rights defenders, was launched. The Natalia Project is based upon three principles. By signing up through social media, people can participate in monitoring alarms triggered by human rights defenders wearing a wristband. When an alarm is triggered, it immediately alerts local partners and the headquarters of civil rights defenders, providing the exact time and position of the assault. When the signal reaches social media platforms, people are able to react and get involved. What makes the Natalia Project unique is that it enables the distress signal to reach everyone simultaneously. The wristband is designed to be durable in order to withstand the brutality and violence of an assault. Its purpose is to serve as a lifeline. There are several ways to activate the alarm, which is also set off if removed by force. During the initial phase, 30 human rights defenders will be equipped with wristbands and trained in their use. By the end of 2014, the goal is to have 55 active bracelets protecting those at risk. With the Natalia Project, human rights defenders at risk become connected to the world, and those following in the brave footsteps of Natalia Estemirova are no longer alone. The world is watching. Sign up at nataliaproject.org.
So, we have a track record at Civil Rights Defenders of successful innovation implementation. So we understand its inherent power. We have seen the results, and since the Natalia project launched in 2013, as you might have noticed, the video has a few years on it as well, we've been able to expand this program, and to date, more than 100 human rights defenders are wearing this device globally. And most importantly, to date, none has been arrested. So the deterrence is real, it is powerful, and it has real-life impact. Of course, Civil Rights Defenders is not alone in using innovation to advance human rights. So I figured I'll just briefly share two examples of two of the many organizations that work similarly. UNICEF Innovation, as far as I know, was one of the first units to work with innovation in a structured way. I met them, or I came across them in 2009, so they've at least been operating since then. A few years ago, their staff in Nigeria reported that there were a lot of children that was not allowed to attend school there. And Nigeria, as with so many other countries, have signed the UN Declaration of the Rights of the Child, meaning that every child should be allowed to attend school. So they went there thinking that they need to have some kind of campaign to get schools to accept children. And when they started talking to a few of the schools, they realized that the problem was actually that the children didn't have birth certificates. So technically they didn't exist, meaning that if the school let them attend, they would not get any funding from the government, and they could not afford to have additional students. So then they went and started talking to the hospitals, figuring out why they didn't have birth certificates. And it turns out there was no system really. There wasn't a difference if it was rural or urban, it just did not exist. So they started talking with the hospital and other government agencies, and after a while they set up a new system that they call Rapid SMS. So today, midwives across Nigeria is registering children by sending an SMS as they're born. And then when they come of age, they exist. They can attend school, but they can also, since they exist, get health care and other benefits that we just get from being citizens. And I think it's a really good example of how you go to fix this problem, but as you learn more about it, you understand that it's actually over here. That's the solution that you need. And that's a really, really good lesson for understanding the local context and the local issues. Particularly since I saw quite a few here as well from Europe, so if you're thinking of working abroad, be humble, find a local partner. Ushahidi, and I should mention this up front, I'm a bit biased because I used to work there. It's a Kenyan non-profit company. I will not define what a non-profit company is. I still don't know. But they came about in an election in 2006 that unfortunately during 2007 got violent. Violence is not a common thing in Kenya. They were not used to it. Several thousand unfortunately died, and there were many more that were internally displaced. And the founders felt that they wanted to contribute somehow. So they, overnight, started coding this little basic application that would do crowdsourced crisis mapping, essentially basically getting information off of Twitter, through SMS and phone calls or other open data, and putting it on a map. Within a few years' time, the UN used it for the aftermath of the earthquake in Haiti in 2009, and since then it's expanded to be used in more than 150 countries around the world, deployed more than 100,000 times. And I think it's a really inspiring example. One of the founders told me once that when I asked them why they did it, was that they did it because they needed to scratch their own itch. It sounds like a simple thing to say, and I don't think he intended it as something greater than actually just being a little bit humble, but it really got to me because consider the importance of that. They knew the local environment, they knew what they needed to do, because they're there, they understand it. What works here in Sweden or in the US or in Australia might not work at all in Mozambique or Burma or in Kenya for that matter, because it's a very different infrastructure. It's a very different way of understanding technology besides the access and the literacy levels and so on. It's how you interact, just on a human level, it's different as well. So we need to take that into account when we design. And also, I will say that since I've lived and worked a lot in the Global South, they are really, really scrappy. They're mobile first and often mobile only, and they're way more cost effective than we are here. So I would not be surprised to see that in 10, 15 years time, the Global South is actually dominating this sector. And it will be interesting to see what happens with Silicon Valley unless they manage to buy them all out. So maybe I should also introduce myself a little bit further. Thanks to Manny for the presentation as well. But just to put it in context, I used to work for the UN Secretariat, where I started a UN Twitter account. I also worked a lot with change management there. And, I've been for the Swedish Embassy in Australia, I worked for SIDA, the Swedish Development Agency, and in Kenya, as I mentioned, I worked for Ushahidi, which really is an innovation leader. Out of Ushahidi also spun iHub, which is Africa's largest innovation hub, with more than 10,000 members. And if you have a chance, it would be fantastic if you wanted to listen to the podcast and interact with me. I interview social innovators or social entrepreneurs and human rights activists. So since I saw from the stretched arms earlier, I think you're a good crowd for it. But basically what I want to get to by saying that is that I lived and worked on 4 continents, and I've been working in this kind of intersection of innovation and human rights throughout. I'm considered often by others as an expert, but I would never claim to be one myself, because I feel that I know so little of this topic. But I do know a lot about what doesn't work. So I've been sharing a few examples of what does work, and I figured just with this crowd and us being here in Sweden as well, I'll share an example of how badly things can go if you don't think ahead. Quite a few of you, I'm sure, have heard of Grindr, so you might have heard of this example as well. It is basically a dating app. They label it themselves at Grindr as for gay, bi, and curious men. I like the curious part. But it's basically a dating app. So you go in, you create a profile, and then if you have a dialogue, you might meet up. And of course, if you put this into App Store, it's available anywhere. If you live in a country and download and start using it, where it's illegal to be homosexual, or if it's just frowned upon for other reasons, it's been used by police, security forces, militia, or other groups to really target gay and bisexual men. And tech is never evil. Tech has no feelings in that sense. And I'm sure that Grindr isn't evil either, so I don't want to put them out there in that sense. But what I want to do by this example is use it for you to understand. You have to consider the risks of employing something globally beforehand, because you don't want to be sorry afterwards. These things have real effects. So be smart and think ahead of it in your planning, and at the very least inform your users properly. So, I'm going to get back to the Human Rights Innovation Initiative. So we talked about, or you saw the video on Natalia project, and basically through the success of that, we at Civil Rights Defenders created the Human Rights Innovation Initiative. The ambition is rather bold, actually. We want to disrupt the traditional human rights space with key innovations. So we have these 200 partners globally. And the partners are on the ground, real human rights defenders who, through their hard work, dedication, their local knowledge, understand the issues that they face better than anyone else. So our main focus is to support them through a tailor-made approach, basically leveraging the problems they face for the solutions that we create, which result in increased security for them and greater impact. And also then building that for scale so that it can be used by human rights defenders or people that want to advance human rights anywhere. We call this model defender-centric, since we put them in the center and the very focus of it. And I cannot stress the importance of that. Always work really closely with the problem owner, particularly if you're working outside of your familiar space. Then it's even more important to understand those local conditions. Our partners, or for our partners, security is the most important concern. Arrests, torture, lengthy and arbitrary prison sentences are unfortunately all too common. So we need to innovate to keep them safe. We need to innovate to improve the security of human rights defenders in their context. And of course, without impact, this work will be futile. So we also need to innovate to support the effects of the evidence that they collect and share. That we innovate to empower them to increase their impact on civil and political rights. Some of Civil Rights Defenders' accomplishments to date include supporting the first Queer Fest in St. Petersburg in 2009, how we set up an emergency fund that is open 24/7 that, amongst other things, assist in temporary relocation of threatened human rights defenders. Since 2012, we have conducted more than 25 digital security trainings for over 300 human rights defenders across the globe. We lobbied the Swedish government to establish a national human rights institution. In 1998, we published a book on all the victims from the war in Kosovo, and we have since 2013 every year handed out the Civil Rights Defender of the Year award. And we also organize Defenders Days, a conference that gathers human rights defenders from across the globe to exchange experiences and receive training. So please stay updated, share. You can tell others what you heard here today. If you don't mind, it would be great if you could follow us online, because by following us, you're also supporting the very human rights defenders and making sure that they get heard. Because if they get heard, the governments can't shut them down or shut them up. That's really the key point. doesn't matter how good you are at something if no one knows you're around and no one knows what kind of risks you're taking to get that message out, to hold your government accountable. But I also am really proud to stand here in front of you today and share that last week we launched our very first Innovation Challenge. It allows you to submit your ideas for how to improve human rights. So you can take part in that competition, and I would really urge you to check it out. You can go to our website, civilrightsdefenders.org, and under innovation you'll find all the information you need. We basically have a sum there that allows us to do some incubation and help you advance your idea to a prototype. We also have the possibility on the website for you to just send in your idea whenever you might have it. If you don't have the capacity right now to follow it through, perhaps we can. So feel free to also just check it out and share it if you have some good idea. And whether you apply for the Innovation Challenge or share your idea or not, if you want to make a difference, please connect with us. We will be happy to hear your point of view and hear what you have to say. And we will support you. So don't be a stranger, and thank you for listening.
Mathias Antonsson, thank you very much. Really interesting talk, and hopefully time for a couple of questions later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to slightly shift our focus now to gender.